Welcome to the Surviving BPD Relationship Breakup Podcast with your host, counselor, and trauma recovery coach, ajmahari. AJ has over 30 years experience specializing in recovery from BPD relationship breakups and offers expert knowledge, in-depth understanding delivered with compassion and empathy. To purchase and book sessions with ajmahari, please visit ajmahari.ca. Welcome to the show. Here's your host, ajmahari.
When it comes to the so-called malignant borderline, which of course is aimed at women with BPD and forget men with BPD. It's a little bit silly. So in terms of even co-morbid borderline personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder, the first thing to remember and consider is that a lot of people are thinking that their borderline now is comorbid BPD NPD or comorbid BPD ASPD. But you have to really remember that that's less than 2% of all people, or women, but not just women, but less than 2% of all diagnosed with BPD, if it's even efficacious or proven, would then be in the category of comorbid or co-occurring BPD and antisocial personality disorder. But you have to be really discerning, and you have to also step out of your own pain. And you have to be really logical about it. But you can't diagnose them anyways. But 8 signs that you could really look at, if they really stand out, then you might be with a borderline comorbid ASPD or antisocial personality disorder. Or more to the point, why aren't these women and or men with BPD, with what I'm about to just briefly go over here, with a few words and brief explanation about 7 things or 8 things here, that they should really, I would still say, and many people believe, that if somebody meets the criteria based on what I'm about to say here, is just some of the key things, then they should really be diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, not borderline personality disorder first. So seems like a lot of imprecise diagnosing going on, more to the point. And then in the court of public opinion across the internet, too many people listening to this, that, or the other thing, and then thinking that you know when you probably can't know. But these delineating aspects of the difference between somebody with BPD and somebody with ASPD, or if they're going to say that some less than 2% of women with BPD are also comorbid with ASPD, then number one that you should be looking for is this person. This means from the time that you meet them, essentially, except for they could turn on the charm. But this person, this female then, let's go with just women here, this female with what you think is BPD, or what you might get diagnosed with as BPD, could be erroneous, because she may well be a psychopath. So what's that first delineating sign or point? That she is cold. She is ice cold. She may be passionately on fire in the bedroom, but she is ice cold in terms of emotion. So you're going to see not all this emotional trigger to dysregulation, not all this really reactivity emotionally and such, because one of the key core traits of antisocial personality disorder that you're not going to see in the majority of women with BPD, even if you think, well, they're cold sometimes, not the same as just being cold, period. The next point, number 2, is calculating. And these are not easy things to assess, even for diagnosticians, but they're less easy for people who are being hurt, having their hearts broken, etc., in a relationship to somebody when you thought they were somebody else in the beginning. The second point here, or sign, is calculating. And calculating is hard to measure, especially if it's your girlfriend or your wife or whomever in your life. How are you going to know just how calculating they're being? Because there's a real difference between borderline issues of or dysfunctional executive function, not being able to organize to be really calculating, and a psychopath who doesn't have that emotionality, is really cold and is going to be really calculating, but yeah, may then be extremely deceptive to you because they'll turn on charm, the verb, like narcissists do, and borderlines really don't do, but psychopaths do. So they seem so charming. And they're so, they're giving you an entirely deceptive presentation, which people with BPD generally aren't. It ends up that they do, but they're not doing it in any organized, intentional, well thought out, or calculated way. And they're motivated, women with BPD as well as men, but women with BPD are motivated by emotions and emotionality and what all that means. And if they have a cold presentation, not if they're cold for 10 minutes or aloof for 15 minutes or something, then the coldness and the calculating without emotionality. And the third point here, or sign, that you can really tell the difference between a borderline and a female psychopath, or a borderline that you might think has antisocial personality disorder, like, or two, right? Callousness. Callousness is a really big thing. These are kind of the big three C's: cold, calculating, callous, with really a fourth C, no conscience. And you might think that the woman in your life, or who was in your life with BPD, had no conscience, but it is entirely a whole different level and reality of what being with somebody, more to the point it would be a female psychopath, or this malignant borderline kind of like BPD, ASPD, which is less than 2% of all of them. No conscience is not a sign or a trait or part of borderline personality disorder on its own. So it's really four C's, isn't it? Cold, calculating, callous, no conscience, with no emotionality. They're not driven by the emotions in the same way that women with BPD are. So no remorse. And again, a lot of people think women with BPD have no remorse, but you don't really know that, because there is the internal experience of many with BPD, that they will feel remorse and they will question themselves and they will be confused, but they may never show you that because they are deeply, deeply shamed. They're living in ensconced shame and a lack of self, but self-hatred. And then again, the other thing that's really different between BPD and ASPD, which isn't so evident or easy to delineate, is that people with BPD have the capacity for empathy. So some can show empathy sometimes, and then if they're triggered to emotional dysregulation, yeah, that's going to get suspended. And then maybe some people with BPD come back 15 minutes later, a day or two later, whatever, and they really apologize and they really do mean it. Or maybe they don't really get to an apology, but you can tell that they have some remorse or some guilt or feel something is off about what they did or how they behaved, how they hurt you, if they understand they hurt you, because people with BPD are not aware of the difference between self and other. And then the next point would be lacking emotionality, would be the sixth sign that you're probably not dealing with a borderline woman, but a psychopathic woman. Lack of emotionality, flat affect, zero emotions. And the eighth is they're very exploitative, right? But so too can borderlines be fairly exploitative and with entitlement, right? So the exploitation sign of a female psychopath has to be really to the nines extreme and have the big three C's: coldness, calculating, and being extremely callous. And that's not present in all of the exploitation that women with BPD might engage in, that's driven and motivated by emotionality. And then the eighth and the key sign of the difference between a borderline woman and a woman with ASPD is criminal behavior. Not criminal behavior like they went to the store and stole cheese, or they stole a coat at the store, which is, pretty bad, but can happen within BPD, right? Or they were impulsively spending, and then, they do something untoward, like maybe financial fraud. It's usually not outright violent what they do. Females in particular can be, but the criminal behavior that really denotes the difference between a borderline woman and a psychopathic woman, a woman with ASPD, and really these shouldn't be intertwined as coexisting. They need to be delineated more carefully so that women who actually have antisocial personality disorder get diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. I think one of the biggest problems is that psychiatry, DSM, whatever, they shove them through BPD, diagnose them with BPD, and then look to see if they can add ASPD. When that is just on its face, if you use common sense, it's ridiculous. It's, I think, unethical, and I would say it's highly unprofessional. And I would say, what are these diagnosticians doing if they can't parse this stuff? It's a pretty big area that's a mess. But the criminal behavior of a woman with BPD, okay, so where and how does that straddle? Maybe the categories, right? BPD versus ASPD. And this would be the less than 2% of all people, women diagnosed with BPD, that might fit into that comorbidity, which to me, they should just be diagnosed as antisocial personality disorder, not given a borderline diagnosis, is in this criminal behavior area where, if they're harming animals, if they have animals and they're, really hurting them, not feeding them, neglecting them, maybe even unaliving them. This is something that certainly is different between people with BPD and people with ASPD. And so criminal behavior will rise to being very heinous, whether violent or not violent, heinous crime, not sort of crime that is important and wrong, but lesser crimes, right? They're still crimes that we can see people in BPD committing. And then there's like fraudulent behavior, right? Of lies, calling police falsely, setting you up. But again, in BPD, that happens when it is emotionally driven. It is aberrant, and I'm not trying to defend anything about BPD here or the way people behave. So if a woman is fraudulently accusing you of things and parental alienation, etc., when there's children involved, then lies and calling the police falsely on you, it's emotionally driven to alienate you from your child or children, which is horrible, and I'm not saying that's okay. But that is one level of severe BPD. Then when you're looking at the psychopathic woman, or if there is any efficacy to this BPD, ASPD comorbidity, termed malignant borderline by some therapist out there who didn't make her case in a video, then the fraudulent behavior, which will be more egregious to heinous criminal behavior, in telling lies and dragging men through court, there's two levels of this. And that might seem silly to say, because who cares if it's happening to you? I get that part. The one level is the borderline level of desperately trying, and often when there's kids involved, but desperately just trying to be right, the right fighting in BPD, the punishment and the revenge in BPD, and it's coming from the realm of borderline personality disorder, that they could still call the police on you and lie about you, and they could still be trying to alienate you from your child and or doing this because of a court situation. And then when you look at it through the lens of what is antisocial personality disorder, well, it's going to be ramped up, and it needs to more or less be accompanied by what I laid out already here, but mainly the three C's: cold, calculating, and callous. So you don't see them having tantrums. You don't see them like they might rage, but you don't see any emotion in that. You don't see trigger to dysregulated emotion. You won't see age regression in these women if they're psychopathic or fit ASPD more than BPD. Not to say that really BPD comorbid ASPD is very efficacious, because it's less than 2% of all people diagnosed with BPD. And more to the point, there are a lot of women out there behaving like this, and then people are like, I think I'm with a borderline, but I don't know because they're not diagnosed. When you might be describing a female psychopath, and you don't know because they're not diagnosed. But remember these three key things among everything else: cold, calculating, and callous. And that fourth C, no conscience, which is not a measure of anything to do with a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. But no conscience is that fourth C that's an indicator of antisocial personality disorder. So no emotionality. Their behavior, their manipulation, their lies, their no remorse, their no empathy, their exploitation, their using you, all of it is going to be driven by anything and everything but not emotionally driven. That's a real key core thing there to understand that does delineate the difference between the, so cold, calculating, and callous are not three descriptors or traits of borderline women, but they are three descriptors and traits of psychopathic women. So then can we say that a woman who has been diagnosed or you think has BPD and does all of these behaviors, so manipulative, lies, all kinds of problematic, so injurious to you, that she could be comorbid with ASPD? No, if there's the emotional drivers to all of that horrible behavior. If there's emotional drivers, that's borderline personality disorder. If there's cold, calculating, callous, lack of emotionality, that is psychopathy. That is antisocial personality disorder. And I don't see how the powers that be, whoever they are, or these researchers, can say that BPD in women is highly associated with ASPD or comorbid with ASPD or a secondary psychopathy when their behavior, that I'm not trying to justify or excuse, is driven by emotionality. It doesn't make it okay what they do, doesn't make it okay what they say, doesn't make it okay how they hurt you, and then some. But the difference is, when things are motivated and driven by emotionality in the female, they are borderline, because not even narcissists feel the same kind of emotion. So, as borderlines, they have way too much emotion, but what they do with it is not justifiable either. And so, you're looking for that woman who doesn't show triggered to emotional dysregulation, doesn't have a lot of tantrums, isn't overly emotional. You're looking for the woman, if you think that you're with a borderline who's comorbid or secondary psychopathy or comorbid ASPD. No. More to the point, what you can really take to the bank, if you can get a shrink to diagnose someone properly and you can get them to go for assessment, is the cold, calculating, callous lack of emotionality that is pervasive. Then you're looking at a female with antisocial personality disorder. And often, they're not going to have borderline personality disorder as well. It's like there's no point in diagnosing a woman with cold, calculating, callous, lack of remorse, no remorse, no empathy, no conscience, let's add in there, by the way, and lacking entirely or more or less entirely in emotionality. And not that the odd female psychopath isn't going to fake, feign, deceive with faked seeming emotionality. So at the end of the day out there, people have to realize you really can't diagnose these people anyway. And that shouldn't be your goal, because if you're dealing with anything that I've talked about here, whether it's more in what I'm describing and I think stands up and can be said through many schools of thought and pioneering clinicians, just as and researchers that aren't finding this, what's being purveyed out there, that borderline women are secondary psychopaths or psychopaths. No. But there are women out there that are psychopaths, yes, but they're not being diagnosed correctly. The thing that is really makes saying that a borderline woman has secondary psychopathy, or that a borderline woman is also a psychopath, what makes it really highly unlikely, and it's not proven and it's not settled science, is their emotionality versus the entire lack of emotionality in a psychopath. They don't feel emotions. They're not emotionally driven at all. They might feel anxiety. Apparently, I've heard lately, like becoming more aware of that they might feel anxiety. But remember this, okay? So the malignant borderline, the BPD, ASPD co-morbid, the supposed secondary psychopath borderline woman, that's not even on the table, because they need to be diagnosed as psychopaths. Antisocial personality disorder, if and when and only when it is clearly established that they are cold, calculating, callous, no remorse, no empathy, and lacking in emotionality. So you're with a woman with a lot of emotionality doing a lot of things, that's likely not a psychopath. But when you take out the emotionality and they can feign the emotionality, and they're cold, calculating, callous, and lacking emotionality, then we're talking about a female psychopath.
You've been listening to the Surviving BPD Relationship Breakup Podcast. Our passion is to bring expert information for people that are hurt or traumatized by someone with BPD. We truly hope you've gotten something from the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. For more or get sessions with AJ, go to ajmahari.ca. See you next time.